What happens when the most powerful entertainment empire in South Korea, a company that literally built its throne on the backs of 7 boys from Bangtan, suddenly gets called out, not by a rival CEO, not by a journalist, not by a leaked document, but by a mother. Yeah, you heard that right. A mother. Someone who watched her son train until his bones ached. Someone who signed those papers with trembling hands years ago hoping her child would shine. Now standing up and saying, "You broke your promise." But here's the question, which mother was it? And what exactly did HYBE violate? Was it about money? Was it about creative freedom? Or was it something deeper, something that cuts into the very soul of what it means to be an artist trapped inside a corporate machine? And here's what's going to blow your mind. Every single BTS member, from the eldest to the youngest, has a story connected to this web of contracts, betrayals, and silent battles that most fans never even knew existed. 7 members, 7 untold angles, 7 reasons why this scandal didn't just crack the surface, it shattered the illusion. So buckle up, because we're counting down from number 7 to number 1, and trust me, each revelation hits harder than the last. Are you ready? Let's go. Number 7, J-Hope, the soldier who smiled while the contract burned behind him. You know what's funny, and by funny, I mean painfully ironic, about young Hoseok, the man the world knows as J-Hope? He was always the one smiling. Always. Even when the cameras weren't rolling, even when the practice room lights flickered at 3 a.m. and every other trainee had already collapsed on the floor, Hoseok was the guy who clapped his hands, cracked a joke, and said, "One more time, let's go." That energy, that relentless sunshine persona, it wasn't fake, but it was armor. And if you really want to understand why the entire HYBE contract scandal hits different when you look at it through his lens, you need to go all the way back to the beginning. Back to when Big Hit Entertainment was not the multi-billion-dollar empire it is today, but a tiny, struggling company operating out of a cramped building in Gangnam with exactly 0 guaranteed future. See, J-Hope didn't just join BTS. He sacrificed an entire identity to become part of it. Before Bangtan, Hoseok was already making a name for himself in the underground street dance scene in Gwangju. He was a local legend. He won competitions, he had crews. He had a path that didn't require signing away years of his life to a company that, at the time, couldn't even promise him a debut date. But he believed. His family believed. And that belief, that raw, unguarded trust, is exactly what makes the contract violation revelation so devastating when you connect the dots. Because here's the thing most fans don't talk about. When J-Hope became the first BTS member to enlist in the military in April 2023, it wasn't just a patriotic decision. It was strategic. And not in the way you might think. Sources close to the situation have pointed out that the timing of J-Hope's enlistment coincided with a period where internal discussions about contract renewals, profit-sharing models, and creative control were reaching a boiling point behind HYBE's polished glass doors. Let that satisfying for a second. While the world was crying over his enlistment video, while fans were streaming on the street and making TikToks about how brave he was, behind the scenes, conversations were happening, tense, complicated. Lawyer-filled conversations about what BTS members were actually owed versus what they were getting. And J-Hope? He stepped away. He put on the uniform, shaved his head, and walked into an 18-month silence. But silence doesn't mean ignorance, and it definitely doesn't mean acceptance. Let's talk about what HYBE was supposed to do during that period versus what they actually did. According to multiple Korean media reports and industry insiders, the cooperation contract, the renewed agreement that BTS members signed around 2018, which extended their relationship with HYBE through the mid-2020s, contained specific clauses about how each member's solo work, brand deals, and intellectual property would be managed during the military hiatus period. This wasn't some vague handshake deal. These were detailed provisions that covered everything from music release schedules to merchandise revenue splits to the management of individual social media accounts and brand endorsements. The idea was simple. Even while members were serving, HYBE had a contractual obligation to actively maintain and promote their individual brands, ensure fair profit distribution from pre-recorded content, and most importantly, not use the group's collective brand equity to benefit other acts at the expense of BTS members' individual value. Now, here's where it gets messy. During J-Hope's military service, what did the public see? They saw HYBE pouring massive resources into launching new groups under the HYBE umbrella. They saw marketing budgets that made BTS's early days look like a lemonade stand operation being funneled into acts that were brand new, while J-Hope's solo discography, his album, Jack in the Box, which was a critical masterpiece that explored themes of identity, ambition, and artistic rebirth, received what many industry analysts described as minimal sustained promotional support. And it wasn't just about promotion. It was about revenue transparency. See, when an artist like J-Hope releases music, performs at Lollapalooza as a headliner, which he did, becoming the first South Korean artist to headline a major US music festival, by the way, and generates income from streaming royalties, merchandise, and brand partnerships, there's supposed to be a clear, auditable trail of where that money goes. The contract reportedly stipulated specific percentages, specific timelines for payment, and specific reporting obligations from HYBE to each member. But according to insiders, the actual financial reports that members and their families received during the military period were, let's just say, less than satisfying. They were vague. They were delayed. And in some cases, they contained discrepancies that raised serious red flags. Now, J-Hope's mother, and this is crucial, was one of the family members who, along with other BTS parents, began asking questions. Not publicly, not dramatically, but quietly, through the proper channels. She wanted to know why certain revenue figures didn't match public data. She wanted to understand why promotional commitments outlined in the contract weren't being fulfilled. And she wasn't alone. But here's what makes J-Hope's position at number 7 so important. His situation set the template. His was the first case where the gap between contractual promises and corporate reality became undeniable, because he was the first to enlist, the first to be in a position where he couldn't personally oversee his career, and therefore the first whose family had to step in and say, wait a minute, something isn't adding up. Think about that. The man who always smiled, who always put the team first, who literally danced his way through every hardship with grace and positivity, his trust was the first to be tested. And when his mother started looking at the numbers, started comparing what was promised with what was delivered, she didn't find sunshine. She found shadows. She found line items that didn't make sense. She found promotional commitments that existed on paper but never materialized in reality. And the worst part? When questions were raised through official channels, the responses from HYBE's management team were described by one source as corporate deflection at its finest, lots of words, very few answers, and an unmistakable undertone of don't push too hard. But if you think J-Hope's story is where the cracks started showing, oh, you have no idea what's coming. Because at number 6, we're going to talk about a member whose solo era wasn't just underwhelming in terms of support. It was actively sabotaged by decisions that make absolutely no sense unless you understand the dark side of how entertainment contracts actually work in South Korea. A member who smiled for the cameras while being handed a schedule that was designed to fail. Can you guess who it is? Stay locked in, because this list is just getting started, and the deeper we go, the uglier it gets. Number 6, Jungkook, the golden magne whose golden era was wrapped in invisible chains. Let's talk about Jungkook, the boy who auditioned for a survival show at 15, who had offers from 7 different entertainment companies, 7, the same number that would later define his destiny, and chose Big Hit because of one man, Kim Namjoon. He watched Namjoon rap during his audition and said, "That's where I want to be." That decision, made by a teenager from Busan who still had baby fat on his cheeks and stars in his eyes, changed the entire trajectory of global pop music. And 2 decades worth of loyalty, sweat, tears, and record-breaking achievements later, what did the system give him back? Let's dig in, because Jungkook's chapter in this contract scandal isn't just heartbreaking, it's infuriating. When Jungkook launched his solo era in 2023, the world expected nothing less than total domination. And on the surface, that's exactly what happened. 7. Featuring Latto debuted at number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100, making him the first solo K-pop act to achieve that milestone. 3D with Jack Harlow followed. Standing Next to You became a global phenomenon. His album, Golden, sold millions. He performed at the FIFA World Cup opening ceremony in Qatar. By every measurable metric, Jungkook was not just succeeding, he was rewriting the rules of what a K-pop soloist could achieve on the world stage. But here's the question nobody was asking loud enough at the time. If Jungkook was generating this level of revenue, this level of global attention, this level of brand value, where was all of it going? And more importantly, was the infrastructure behind his solo career actually built to maximize his success, or was it built to extract maximum value from him in the shortest possible window before his military enlistment? Because when you look at the timeline, and I mean really look at it, not as a fan watching music videos, but as someone analyzing a business operation, the pattern is disturbing. Jungkook's entire solo album cycle, from first single to final promotion, was compressed into an impossibly tight window. We're talking about an artist who generated billions of streams, who had the attention of every major market on the planet, being rushed through a promotional cycle that gave him barely 3 months of active promotion before he was shipped off to military service in December 2023. 3 months. For context, when a Western artist of comparable stature, say, a Harry Styles or a Billie Eilish, releases a solo album, their promotional cycle spans 6 to 12 months minimum, with carefully planned tour legs, festival appearances, late-night show circuits, magazine covers, brand partnership rollouts, and sustained radio promotion. Jungkook got a fraction of that. And it wasn't because he lacked demand. The demand was volcanic. Concert promoters were reportedly offering astronomical figures for even a handful of solo shows. Festival organizers across North America, Europe, and Asia were competing to book him. Brand deals from luxury houses were flooding HYBE's inbox daily. But instead of capitalizing on what was arguably the biggest solo debut momentum in K-pop history, HYBE chose speed over strategy. They crammed everything into a window so tight that Jungkook was literally filming music videos, recording songs, doing variety show appearances, and preparing for military enlistment simultaneously. The man was running on fumes, and everyone around him knew it. Now, here's where the contract violation angle becomes critical. According to the cooperation agreement, HYBE had specific obligations regarding how solo activities would be planned and executed. These weren't suggestions, they were contractual commitments. The agreement reportedly outlined that each member's solo era would receive a dedicated management team, a minimum promotional budget proportional to projected revenue, a strategic rollout plan developed in consultation with the artist and their representatives, and, this is the big one, a transparent accounting of all revenue generated from solo activities with quarterly reports provided to the member and their designated family representative. Let's break down what actually happened versus what was supposed to happen. First, the dedicated management team. Multiple reports from Korean entertainment journalists indicated that Jungkook's solo management was handled by a rotating cast of HYBE staffers who were simultaneously managing other projects. There was no singular, focused team whose only job was to maximize Jungkook's solo potential. Compare that to how HYBE handled the debut of some of their newer groups, where entire departments were created from scratch with dedicated personnel, exclusive budgets, and laser-focused strategic planning. The disparity was glaring, and it didn't go unnoticed by the people closest to Jungkook. Second, the promotional budget. While exact figures are proprietary, industry analysts who track K-pop marketing expenditures noted that the promotional spend behind Jungkook's golden era was disproportionately low compared to the revenue it generated. We're talking about a return on investment ratio that would make any CFO grin from ear to ear, which sounds great from a corporate perspective, but from an artist's perspective, it means the company was deliberately underinvesting in promotion while over-reaping the rewards. Every dollar not spent on strategic promotion was a dollar of potential career growth left on the table, and that growth belonged to Jungkook, not to HYBE's quarterly earnings report. Third, and this is where Jungkook's mother enters the picture, the financial transparency issue. Jungkook's family, like the families of all BTS members, was supposed to receive detailed financial reports about solo activity revenue. This isn't unusual in the Korean entertainment industry. For artists of BTS's stature, family involvement in financial oversight is not only common, but contractually mandated. But what Jungkook's family reportedly received were summary reports, broad-stroke documents that showed total revenue figures without the granular breakdown that would allow for proper verification. Where was the streaming revenue going? How were YouTube ad revenues being allocated between the artist and the company? What about the merchandise sold under Jungkook's individual brand? What about the FIFA World Cup performance fee and associated sponsorship deals? The numbers were big, but the details were murky. And in the world of entertainment contracts, murky details aren't just inconvenient, they're a red flag the size of a billboard. Jungkook's mother, a woman who had watched her youngest son leave home at 15 to chase a dream in Seoul, who had spent years trusting that the company nurturing her boy would treat him fairly, began to realize that trust and transparency were not the same thing. She could trust HYBE's intentions all day long, but without transparent, verifiable financial data, that trust was built on sand. And sand shifts. What makes this even more painful is understanding who Jungkook is as a person. This is a young man who has repeatedly stated in interviews that he doesn't care about money, that all he wants to do is perform, create, and make ARMY happy. He's the guy who, during Bangtan bombs, would rather play with a camera than discuss business. He's the member who trusted the system completely because he literally grew up inside it. He entered Big Hit as a child and became a man within its walls. He didn't know any other way. So when the adults in his life, his parents, his family, started raising concerns about financial discrepancies, it wasn't because Jungkook was complaining. It was because the people who loved him most looked at the numbers and felt something was wrong. They felt that their son, the boy who gave everything to this company, who generated hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, who sacrificed his teenage years, his privacy, his normalcy, that boy wasn't being treated with the contractual fairness he was promised. And HYBE's response? More summary reports. More corporate language. More delays. The same pattern that J-Hope's family encountered was repeating itself, but this time with even bigger numbers at stake and even less transparency to show for it. But listen, if you think the financial angle is the darkest part of the story, if you think it's all about money and percentages and quarterly reports, you're not ready for number 5. Because at number 5, we're going to talk about a member whose contract situation goes beyond finances and straight into the territory of creative suppression. A member who had music ready, who had art ready, who had an entire creative vision ready to share with the world, and was told to wait, to shrink, to fit inside a box that was never designed for someone with that much fire. And when his family found out why he was being held back, the anger wasn't about money anymore. It was about something far more personal. Can you feel it? Let's keep going. Number 5, Jimin, the artist who was told his own art wasn't the priority. Park Jimin. Say that name in any airport, any stadium, any street corner from Seoul to Sao Paulo, and watch what happens. People stop. People gasp. People pull out their phones. This is a man who was voted the most searched K-pop idol on Google multiple years running, a man whose fan cams broke the internet before breaking the internet was even a phrase people use seriously. A man who moved his body with such precision and emotion that professional dancers, people who had trained their entire lives, watched his performances with their jaws on the floor. Jimin didn't just dance. He translated pain into movement, loneliness into choreography, and longing into every single micro-expression that crossed his face on stage. He was, by every standard, an artist in the purest sense of the word. And that's exactly what made HYBE's treatment of his solo era not just disappointing, it was a creative crime. Let's rewind to March 2023, when Jimin released Face, his debut solo album. Now, you need to understand the context of this release to fully appreciate how significant it was. Face wasn't a pop album designed to chart. It wasn't a collection of catchy hooks assembled by a committee of producers to maximize streaming numbers. It was a deeply personal, almost confessional body of work that dealt with themes of identity, anxiety, self-worth, and the terrifying vulnerability of standing alone after spending a decade as part of the most famous group on the planet. Jimin poured himself into this album. He co-wrote tracks, he was involved in production decisions, he conceptualized the visual identity. This wasn't an artist being handed a product to promote. This was an artist creating something that came from the deepest, most honest part of his soul. And what happened? Like crazy, debuted at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. Let that sink in. Number 1. Jimin became the highest-charting solo Korean artist in the history of the Billboard Hot 100 at that time. The song was everywhere. The album was critically acclaimed. Music journalists who typically dismissed K-pop as manufactured fluff were writing essays about the emotional depth of Face. Jimin had done it. He had proven, beyond any shadow of doubt, that he wasn't just a member of BTS. He was a solo force capable of standing at the very top of the global music industry. So, what did HYBE do with this once-in-a-generation momentum? They fumbled it. And not accidentally. Not because of bad luck or unfortunate timing. They fumbled it in ways that, when you look at the contract, appear to be deliberate strategic choices that prioritized corporate interests over Jimin's artistic career. Here's what the cooperation contract reportedly stipulated for solo releases. Each member was entitled to a minimum promotional window that included dedicated media appearances, strategic playlist placements coordinated by HYBE's distribution partners, a social media campaign managed by HYBE's in-house marketing team, physical album distribution that matched demand projections, and, critically, the right to approve or reject the promotional strategy before it was implemented. The artist had a voice. That was the deal. That was what was written in ink and signed by both parties. But what Jimin experienced was dramatically different from what was promised. First, let's talk about the promotional window. After, like crazy, hit #1, the logical move, the move that any competent management team with even a basic understanding of music industry dynamics would make, was to extend the promotional cycle. You ride that wave. You book every talk show. You schedule radio interviews. You plan surprise performances. You leverage that #1 debut into sustained chart presence, which translates into long-term brand equity, which translates into tour demand, which translates into career longevity. That's Music Management 101. Instead, Jimin's promotional activities were cut short. Appearances were limited. The media push that should have lasted months was condensed into weeks. And the reason? According to industry insiders, HYBE's internal scheduling priorities had already shifted. Resources, human resources, marketing budgets, strategic attention were being reallocated to other projects within the HYBE ecosystem. Jimin's solo era, despite being a commercial and critical triumph, was treated as a checkbox to be completed rather than a career moment to be maximized. But here's where it gets really dark, and this is the part that connects directly to the contract violation. Jimin had more music. He had songs recorded, concepts developed, visual treatments planned. He wanted to release a follow-up. He wanted to build on the momentum of Face, with additional content that would keep his audience engaged and growing. And he was told to wait. Not wait because the timing isn't right. Not wait because we have a better strategy planned. Just wait. The reasoning provided to him and his team, according to sources, was that HYBE needed to balance the release schedule across all artists and that Jimin's additional releases would create internal competition with other HYBE acts who had comebacks planned in adjacent windows. Read that again. An artist who just debuted at #1 on the biggest music chart in the world was told that his music needed to be shelved so that it wouldn't overshadow other acts in the same company. His light was too bright, so they asked him to dim it. And this wasn't a suggestion, it was a directive. A directive that, according to the contract Jimin had signed, HYBE didn't have the unilateral right to make. The cooperation agreement gave members consultation rights over their release schedules. It required mutual agreement on timing decisions. HYBE couldn't just decide to shelve an artist's music without that artist's consent. But that's exactly what they did. They made the decision, communicated it as a fait accompli, and expected compliance. Now, Jimin being Jimin, the same gentle, soft-spoken man who always puts harmony above conflict, who has said in countless interviews that he hates confrontation, who would rather suffer in silence than create discord, he didn't fight it publicly. He smiled. He thanked ARMY. He did his military duty with dignity and grace, enlisting alongside Jungkook in December 2023 with a quiet resolve that broke millions of hearts. But his family? His family didn't smile. Jimin's mother, a woman from Busan who raised her son with the values of hard work, humility, and fairness, was devastated. Not because of the money, though the financial implications of shelving music from an artist at the peak of his commercial power were enormous, but because of what it represented. Her son had given everything to this company. He had trained until his body broke. He had performed through injuries that would have sidelined professional athletes. He had sacrificed relationships, privacy, normalcy, everything a young man is supposed to experience in his 20s, all in service of the group and the company that managed it. And now, at the moment when his individual artistry was finally being recognized by the entire world, the company was telling him to step back, to make room, to be smaller so that others could be bigger. The contract said partnership. The contract said mutual respect. The contract said creative consultation. But the reality said hierarchy. The reality said corporate convenience. The reality said your art matters, but not as much as our quarterly release calendar. Jimin's family raised these concerns through private channels, joining the growing chorus of BTS families who were beginning to realize that the contract they had trusted was being interpreted very differently by HYBE's legal and management teams than it was by the artists and their loved ones. The word violation started being used not as an accusation, but as a description, a factual assessment of the gap between what was written and what was done. And what's particularly heartbreaking about Jimin's situation is the emotional toll. This is an artist who has openly discussed his struggles with self-doubt, who has talked about feeling like he's not enough, who has worked twice as hard as anyone else because he constantly feared being left behind. And in the one moment where the entire world validated him, where the numbers proved beyond argument that he was more than enough, the company that was supposed to be his partner told him to slow down. To wait, to trust the process. But the process wasn't designed to serve him. It was designed to serve the corporation. And trust? Trust was exactly what was breaking. If this story about creative suppression and shelved artistry makes your blood boil, brace yourself. Because at number 4, we're going to meet the member who didn't just encounter the contract violations passively, he understood them intellectually, legally, and strategically. Because he's the one who had been studying the fine print since before most fans even knew what a cooperation agreement was. The leader. The brain. The one who saw the storm coming before anyone else felt the wind. Ready? Number 4, RM. The leader who read every line and still got betrayed. Kim Namjoon. IQ 148. Self-taught English speaker. The boy who learned the language by watching Friends on repeat in his bedroom in Ilsan, who devoured philosophy books while his classmates were reading manga, who scored in the top 1% of the National University entrance exam and chose rap over college because he believed, truly, deeply believed, that music could change the world. This is the man who stood at the United Nations podium, not once, not twice, but 3 times, and spoke about self-love, mental health, and the power of youth in a way that made world leaders sit up and listen. RM wasn't just the leader of BTS. He was the intellectual backbone, the moral compass, the translator, literally and figuratively, between 7 Korean boys from modest backgrounds and a global audience of hundreds of millions. And here's what most people don't realize about Namjoon. He wasn't just the creative leader. He was the business mind. He was the one who, from the very beginning, understood that artistry without awareness is just exploitation waiting to happen. So when we talk about the HYBE contract violation, when we talk about a mother stepping forward and revealing that promises were broken, you need to understand that RM didn't stumble into this realization like some naive artist who just discovered that corporations aren't always kind. No, Namjoon had been watching, studying, preparing, And the fact that even he, with all his intelligence, all his foresight, all his meticulous attention to detail, couldn't prevent what happened, that tells you everything about how deep the systemic failure went. Let's go back to 2018, because that's where the critical chapter of this story begins. In 2018, BTS was at an inflection point. Their original 7-year contract with Big Hit Entertainment was approaching its end, and the entire K-pop industry was holding its breath. Would they renew? Would they scatter to different agencies? Would they negotiate terms that reflected their unprecedented value? The answer came in October 2018 when Big Hit announced that all 7 members had renewed their contracts, reportedly for another 7 years, through approximately 2025-2026. The industry was stunned. K-pop history is littered with groups that disintegrated at the contract renewal point. TVXQ split. EXO lost members. GOT7 left JYP entirely. For all 7 members to stay? It was historic. But here's what didn't make the headlines: the negotiations. And RM was at the center of them. Multiple sources within the Korean entertainment industry have confirmed that Namjoon was not a passive participant in the 2018 contract renewal. He didn't just sign where he was told to sign. He read every clause. He consulted with independent legal advisors, not HYBE's lawyers, his own. He asked questions that, according to one insider, surprised the Big Hit legal team because they weren't expecting that level of sophistication from an artist. Namjoon pushed for specific provisions. He advocated for creative autonomy clauses that would guarantee each member the right to pursue solo projects without unreasonable corporate interference. He fought for transparency mechanisms, regular financial audits, detailed revenue breakdowns, independent verification rights. He insisted on what industry lawyers call most favored nation protections, meaning that if HYBE offered better terms to any future artist or group, BTS members would automatically be entitled to equivalent treatment. And he didn't just negotiate for himself. He negotiated for all 7. Every provision he fought for equally across all members. That's leadership. That's Namjoon. The contract that was eventually signed was reportedly one of the most artist-friendly agreements in K-pop history. It was held up privately within the industry as a model of what fair partnership between artist and company could look like. Namjoon had done his job. He had protected his brothers. He had built a contractual fortress around BTS that was supposed to withstand anything. So what went wrong? Everything. And it went wrong slowly, quietly, in the spaces between the lines that Namjoon had so carefully studied. Because here's the thing about contracts, they're only as strong as the willingness of both parties to honor them. You can write the most perfect agreement in legal history, with every clause airtight and every provision bulletproof, and it still means nothing if one side decides to interpret those provisions in bad faith. And that's exactly what RM began to notice starting around 2022, when the solo era began to take shape. His own solo album, Indigo, released in December 2022, was a masterwork. It wasn't designed for mass consumption, it was an art piece, a deeply personal exploration of youth, purpose, and the terror of approaching 30 as someone who had been famous since he was 18. Namjoon collaborated with artists he personally admired: Erykah Badu, Anderson .Paak, Eugene from Cherry Filter. Every choice was intentional. Every collaboration was meaningful. And the album was received exactly as he hoped, with critical reverence and genuine emotional connection from listeners who appreciated its depth. But even during the Indigo era, Namjoon noticed irregularities. Promotional commitments that were outlined in the contract weren't being fully executed. Media appearance requests that should have been facilitated were being delayed or deprioritized. Revenue reports for his solo work were arriving late and in formats that didn't match the detailed breakdown structure the contract specified. At first, Namjoon handled it the way he handles everything: rationally, diplomatically, through proper channels. He raised concerns with HYBE's management team. He referenced specific contract clauses. He wasn't emotional about it. He was precise. He pointed to Clause A, Section 3, Paragraph 7 and said, "This is what we agreed. This is what's happening. Please explain the discrepancy." And the responses he received were what corporate lawyers would call technically responsive but substantively evasive. HYBE acknowledged the concerns. They promised reviews. They scheduled meetings that were later postponed. They provided explanations that addressed the letter of the question without ever touching the spirit of it. And Namjoon, for all his brilliance, found himself in a trap that many intelligent people fall into. He kept believing that the system would self-correct. He kept thinking that if he just explained the issue clearly enough, if he just pointed to the contract one more time, if he just gave the company one more chance to do the right thing, they would. They didn't. And by the time he released his second solo album, Right Place, Wrong Person, in May 2024, a stunning, genre-defying work that cemented his reputation as one of the most thoughtful artists of his generation, the pattern was undeniable. The title itself felt like a confession, a meta-commentary from a man who had spent his entire adult life in a system that valued his output but not his autonomy. His promotional cycle was, once again, compressed. His creative preferences were, once again, subordinated to corporate scheduling. And the financial transparency he had fought so hard to enshrine in the contract was, once again, more theoretical than actual. Namjoon's mother watched all of this with the unique agony of a parent who knows their child is being treated unfairly, but also knows that their child is too principled to burn the house down over it. She saw her son, the boy who used to stay up all night writing lyrics in his tiny bedroom, who believed that words could change the world, slowly coming to terms with the fact that the contract he had so carefully negotiated was being hollowed out from the inside. The words were still there on the page. The protections still existed in theory. But in practice, HYBE had found 1,000 small ways to erode them, a delayed report here, a redirected budget there, a scheduling conflict that always seemed to benefit the company's newer priorities over BTS members' individual rights. RM's mother didn't just ask questions. She kept records. She documented the discrepancies between contractual obligations and actual performance. She maintained a timeline of promises made and promises broken. She did this not because she wanted a fight, but because her son had taught her something through his own example, that facts matter, that evidence matters, and that the truth is always more powerful than power itself. And when the time came for the mothers of BTS to collectively raise their voices, RM's mother brought something to the table that no one else could, a paper trail. A meticulous, organized, undeniable record of every instance where HYBE's actions failed to match their contractual commitments. The leader had prepared the ground. Even without knowing it, even without planning for this specific moment, Namjoon's obsession with details and his insistence on contractual precision had created the very evidence that would later be used to hold HYBE accountable. But if you think having the evidence is the same as getting justice, you haven't met the member at number 3 yet. Because number 3 isn't about quiet documentation or diplomatic conversations. Number 3, Suga, the savage genius who turned contract rage into art. Min Youngi, Augusti, the man from Taegu who grew up so poor that he had to choose between eating lunch and buying a bus ticket to get to his part-time job at a recording studio. The kid who delivered newspapers at dawn, who worked as a studio assistant for pennies, who slept in the practice room because he couldn't afford a proper bed, and who once told an interviewer, with zero self-pity, zero dramatics, just cold, flat honesty, I was so broke that I had an accident on my bike delivering food and I couldn't afford to go to the hospital, so I just popped my dislocated shoulder back in myself and kept going. That's Min Youngi. That's who we're talking about. A man forged in poverty, sharpened by pain, and absolutely, categorically incapable of staying silent when something is wrong. And if you've been paying attention to this countdown, if you've felt the pattern building, the financial murkiness with J-Hope, the underinvestment with Jungkook, the creative suppression with Jimin, the systemic erosion with RM, then you already know that when this wave of contract violations reached Youngi, the response wasn't going to be polite emails and diplomatic meetings. Youngi doesn't do diplomacy. Youngi does truth. And the truth, delivered in his signature style, hit HYBE like a freight train in a glass factory. Let's start with something most casual fans overlook, but that hardcore ARMY and music industry insiders understand deeply. Min Youngi is not just a rapper and performer. He is one of the most prolific and commercially successful songwriters and producers in the history of Korean music. His KOMCA credits, that's the Korean Music Copyright Association, number well over 100. He has written and produced not just for BTS, but for artists across the industry. His production work generates royalty streams that are independent of his performer income. This distinction matters enormously in the context of the contract dispute because it means Youngi's financial relationship with HYBE operates on multiple levels simultaneously. There's the performer revenue, concert tickets, album sales, merchandise, endorsements. And then there's the creator revenue, songwriting royalties, production fees, copyright ownership shares. The cooperation contract addressed both streams, but in very different ways, and it's in the creator revenue category where the most egregious violations reportedly occurred. Here's how it was supposed to work. When Youngi wrote or produced a song, whether for BTS, for his August D project, or for another artist, the copyright ownership was supposed to be shared according to a formula outlined in the contract. The specifics of that formula are confidential, but industry norms for an artist-producer of Youngi's stature typically allocate a significant share of copyright ownership to the creator, with the management company retaining a portion in exchange for providing studio facilities, distribution, and administrative support. The key word there is portion. Not majority. Not controlling share. A portion. But what Youngi's team discovered, and by team, I mean not just his legal representatives, but his family, including his mother, who had been increasingly involved in reviewing the financial documentation, was that HYBE's accounting of creator revenues didn't match the ownership structure outlined in the contract. Royalty payments were being calculated using percentages that appeared to favor HYBE's share beyond what the agreement specified. And the discrepancies weren't small. When you're dealing with a catalog as massive as Youngi's, hundreds of songs generating royalties across dozens of countries through multiple collection societies, even a 2 or 3% deviation from the contractual split compounds into figures that would make your head spin. We're not talking about missing pocket change. We're talking about systematic under-attribution of creator revenue that, over years, amounted to a staggering sum. Now, here's where Youngi's personality becomes the most important factor in this entire story. Because when RM discovered discrepancies, he documented them and pursued resolution through formal channels. That's RM, methodical, patient, principled. When Jimin's family discovered creative suppression, they raised concerns privately, hoping for correction without confrontation. That's Jimin's world, harmony over conflict, even at personal cost. But Youngi? Youngi looked at the numbers, looked at the contract, looked at the gap between the two, and his first instinct wasn't to write a letter. It was to write a song. And not just any song. Let's talk about the August D trilogy, August D 2016, D2 2020, and D-Day 2023. If you listen to these projects as a casual fan, you hear incredible music, hard-hitting rap, emotional ballads, genre-bending production. But if you listen as someone who understands the context of Youngi's career and his relationship with the industry, you hear something else entirely. A decade-long documentation of an artist's evolving understanding of how the system exploits its most valuable assets. Go back to the first August D mixtape. The last is a raw, unfiltered account of depression and suicidal ideation. But scattered throughout that project are lines about the music industry, about companies that treat artists as products, about the gap between what idols show the public and what they endure privately. At the time, most listeners interpreted these as generic industry criticism. But knowing what we know now, those lines read like early warnings, dispatches from a man who was already seeing cracks in the foundation. By D2, the criticism became sharper and more specific. Daechwita, beyond being a cultural phenomenon that blended traditional Korean music with modern hip-hop in a way that nobody had ever attempted at that scale, was thematically about power, who holds it, who abuses it, and what happens when the powerless rise up. The music video literally depicted Youngi playing two versions of himself, a tyrannical king and a revolutionary. If that's not a metaphor for the artist-corporation dynamic, nothing is. And then came D-Day in 2023, and this is where the contract violation narrative becomes impossible to ignore. D-Day was Youngi's magnum opus, the culmination of 7 years of solo artistic development. And the August D World Tour that accompanied it was his first solo concert tour, a global affair that sold out arenas across Asia, North America, and Europe. The demand was insane. Youngi could have filled stadiums. He could have extended the tour by months. The appetite was there, the revenue potential was astronomical, and every concert promoter on the planet was offering deals. But the tour was limited. Dates were capped. Extensions that Youngi personally requested were reportedly denied or delayed by HYBE's touring division, citing logistical constraints that industry professionals described as unusual given the scale of demand. And when the tour revenue started coming in, the same financial opacity that plagued other members' solo activities was present here too. Touring revenue is complex. It involves ticket sales, merchandise, sponsorships, venue deals, production costs, and dozens of other line items. The contract specified how these should be broken down and reported. But the reports Youngi's team received were, once again, summary-level documents that didn't allow for proper verification. Youngi's mother, a woman who, like her son, doesn't suffer fools gladly, was furious. But her fury wasn't the loud, dramatic kind. It was the Taehyung kind. Cold. Precise. Devastating. She had watched her son nearly destroy himself building a career in an industry that had chewed up and spit out thousands of talented kids before him. She had watched him battle depression, push through physical pain from his shoulder injury, sacrifice his health and his youth for a company that promised to be a partner. And now she was looking at financial reports that didn't add up, at a tour that was artificially constrained, at a catalog of over 100 songs generating revenue that seemed to disproportionately benefit the corporate side of the ledger. What made Youngi's family's involvement particularly significant was their willingness to be direct. While other families pursued quiet diplomacy, Youngi's mother reportedly communicated with HYBE's executive team in terms that left no room for corporate evasion. She didn't ask for explanations, she demanded them. She didn't request meetings, she set deadlines. And when those deadlines passed without satisfactory responses, she didn't escalate within HYBE's internal system. She began consulting with external legal counsel, independent of the representatives that HYBE had provided, to assess the full scope of the contractual violations. This was the moment the dynamic shifted. Because until Youngi's family brought in outside lawyers, HYBE could treat the complaints as internal matters, family concerns to be managed, smoothed over, addressed with corporate patience and carefully worded assurances. But external legal counsel changed the game. It meant that the contractual violations were now being assessed by people who had no relationship with HYBE, no incentive to minimize, and no reason to be diplomatic. And those external lawyers, looking at the same contracts and the same financial reports with fresh, unbiased eyes. Number 2, Jimin, the eldest who gave his time and got silence in return. Kim Seokjin. Worldwide handsome. The man who walked into a big hit audition not because he dreamed of being an idol, but because a talent scout literally chased him down the street near his university and begged him to audition. That's the origin story of BTS's eldest member, not a kid who grew up obsessively training in dance academies, not a prodigy who'd been writing songs since elementary school, but a handsome theater major who was simply walking to class one day and got recruited because someone saw his face and thought, that person needs to be famous. And from that accidental beginning, Kim Seokjin built something extraordinary. He taught himself to sing, really sing, not just carry a melody but deliver vocal performances with emotional precision that made seasoned vocal coaches do double takes. He taught himself to dance despite openly admitting it was his weakest skill, working twice as hard in practice rooms while his naturally gifted members picked up choreography in minutes. He became the emotional anchor of BTS, the eldest brother who cooked meals for the group when they were trainees eating ramen 7 days a week, who cracked dad jokes to ease tension during their darkest moments, who hugged members who were crying backstage after exhausting performances and whispered, "You did well. I'm proud of you." Jin was never the center of the narrative in the way that some members were. He didn't have RM's intellectual magnetism or Jimin's show-stopping stage presence or Suga's razor-sharp lyrical depth. But ask any BTS member privately who held the group together during its most fragile moments, and the answer is always the same: Taehyung. And it was this same selflessness, this same willingness to put the group first, that led Jin to make the decision that would ultimately expose the deepest layer of HYBE's contract violations. In December 2022, Kim Seok-jin became the first BTS member to enlist in the South Korean military. Let's be clear about what this meant. At the time of his enlistment, the South Korean government was actively debating whether BTS members should receive an exemption or deferral from military service, a privilege previously granted to classical musicians and Olympic athletes who brought prestige to the nation. BTS had arguably done more for South Korea's global cultural influence than any artist in history. The BTS effect on the Korean economy was measured in billions of dollars. A legitimate case existed for exemption. But the debate was dragging on, and Jin, at 30 years old, approaching the absolute legal deadline for enlistment, made a decision. He didn't wait for the politicians to figure it out. He didn't lobby for special treatment. He didn't hide behind lawyers or publicists. He walked into the recruitment office and enlisted as an active duty soldier, effectively ending the national debate overnight. His enlistment triggered a domino effect. The other members followed in subsequent months. Jin went first because that's what Jin always did. He took the hit so others wouldn't have to. He cleared the path. He sacrificed. Now, here's what you need to understand about the 18 months that followed, because this is where the contract story becomes absolutely gut-wrenching. When Jin enlisted, the cooperation contract contained specific provisions about how HYBE would manage his career during his military absence. These provisions were especially important for Jin because, unlike some other members who had already released substantial solo projects before enlisting, Jin's solo discography was limited. He had The Astronaut, his beautiful collaboration with Coldplay, released just before enlistment, a song that charted globally and demonstrated his immense commercial potential as a solo artist. But beyond that single, Jin hadn't had the opportunity to establish a full solo era. The timing of his enlistment, driven by his sense of duty rather than career strategy, meant that his solo potential was largely unrealized when he put on the uniform. The contract was supposed to protect that potential. It was supposed to ensure that HYBE would lay the groundwork for Jin's solo career during his absence, developing concepts, securing collaborations, building anticipation through strategic content releases, maintaining his brand presence through carefully managed social media and marketing activities. When Jin returned from service, he was supposed to walk into a fully prepared launchpad, ready to take off as a solo artist with the full weight of HYBE's machinery behind him. That was the promise. That was the deal. That was what his family, his mother in particular, believed would happen when her eldest son traded his microphone for a military uniform. What actually happened during those 18 months was closer to abandonment than management. Let's talk specifics, because the devil is always in the details, and these details are damning. First, the content pipeline. HYBE was contractually expected to maintain a steady stream of Jin-related content during his service: pre-recorded material, behind-the-scenes footage, strategic collaborations announced in advance, birthday projects, anniversary celebrations. The goal wasn't to pretend Jin wasn't in the military. It was to ensure that his fan base remained engaged and his public profile remained active. What fans actually received during Jin's 18 months of service was minimal. Sporadic. Almost afterthoughtish. Compare this to how other entertainment companies manage their artists' military periods. SM Entertainment's handling of EXO members' service periods, for instance, involved meticulously planned content calendars, special album releases, photo book projects, and brand partnership announcements timed to maintain momentum. HYBE, the biggest entertainment company in South Korea, the company with more resources than any K-pop agency in history, gave Jin's absence the strategic attention of a forgotten calendar reminder. Second, the solo career preparation. When Jin was discharged in June 2024, becoming the first BTS member to complete his service, the industry expected a major moment. This was the return of the eldest member of the biggest group in the world. The narrative possibilities were enormous. The soldier comes home, the artist reborn, the next chapter begins. Media outlets were ready. Fans were ready. The entire global K-pop ecosystem was holding its breath. But was HYBE ready? Reports from inside the company paint a picture that is, at best, chaotic and, at worst, negligent. The solo album that Jin eventually released, Happy, which came out in November 2024, was by all accounts a project that was developed on an accelerated timeline after his discharge, not during his service as the contract intended. Sources indicated that when Jin returned from the military and sat down with HYBE's A&R team to discuss his solo plans, he discovered that the preparatory work that should have been done during his absence was largely incomplete. Concepts hadn't been finalized. Producer collaborations hadn't been secured. The marketing strategy was in draft form at best. Jin, the man who had sacrificed 18 months of his prime career years to serve his country, came back to find that the company responsible for preparing his future had essentially put his file in a drawer and focused on other things. And what were those other things? This is where the knife twists. During the exact 18 months that Jin was serving, HYBE was pouring extraordinary resources into debuting and promoting new groups and managing its expanding roster of non-BTS artists. The company's attention, its creative talent, its marketing budget, its strategic focus, all of it was flowing toward the future that HYBE was building beyond BTS. And while building for the future is a legitimate business strategy, doing so at the expense of contractual obligations to your existing artists, the very artists whose success built the platform you're now using to launch new acts, isn't strategic. It's betrayal. Jin's mother experienced this betrayal with a clarity that only a mother can have. She had watched her son leave for the military with a brave smile and a promise from his company that everything would be taken care of. She had spent 18 months trusting that promise, telling herself that HYBE, the company her son had helped build from a struggling startup into a global powerhouse, would honor its commitments. And when Jin came home, when she saw the reality of what had been prepared versus what had been promised, something broke inside her. Not dramatically, not publicly, but permanently. The trust she had placed in HYBE was gone, replaced by a cold, clear understanding that her son's loyalty had been a one-way street. She began talking with the other mothers. She discovered that her experience wasn't unique, it was a pattern. J-Hope's mother had seen financial discrepancies. Jungkook's mother had encountered revenue opacity. Jimin's mother had witnessed creative suppression. RM's mother had documented systematic underperformance. Suga's mother had brought in external lawyers. And now Jin's mother was adding the most emotionally powerful piece of evidence to the collective case, the story of a son who gave his time, the one resource that can never be recovered, the one sacrifice that can never be undone, and a company that wasted it. Time. 18 months of it. Number 1V, the son whose mother broke the silence and shook an empire. Kim Taehyung. V. The boy with the baritone voice that sounds like velvet dipped in moonlight. The face that launched 1,000 magazine covers without ever trying. The artist who paints, who photographs, who plays saxophone for fun, who befriends actors and musicians across every industry because his charm isn't performed, it's pathological, it's involuntary, it's just who he is. Taehyung is the member who, when BTS was still struggling, still unknown, still performing in front of 30 people in borrowed outfits, would look directly into whatever small camera was pointing at him and smile like he was performing at Madison Square Garden. He believed before there was any reason to believe. He loved before there was any guarantee that love would be returned. And maybe that's why his story, and his mother's story, sits at the top of this list. Because when the person who believes the hardest gets hurt the deepest, the sound of that heartbreak doesn't just echo. It reverberates through everything it touches, and it forces everyone who hears it to make a choice, look away or face the truth. Taehyung's mother chose the truth. And it cost her everything and changed everything. Let's build this properly, because number one deserves the full picture. Kim Taehyung grew up in Gyeochang, a rural area in South Gyeongsang Province, not Seoul, not Busan, not any of the metropolitan areas where K-pop dreams are typically born. Gyeochang is farmland. It's rice paddies and mountains and small-town rhythms where everybody knows everybody, and ambitions beyond the local economy are considered risky at best, foolish at worst. Taehyung's family wasn't wealthy. His father was a farmer. His grandmother, who played an enormous role in raising him, lived a life defined by the land and the seasons. When young Taehyung told his family he wanted to be a singer, the response wasn't enthusiastic support, it was worry. Real, justified, working-class worry about a boy chasing a dream that statistically destroys far more lives than it creates. But his mother believed in him. Despite every practical reason not to, despite the financial strain it would cause, despite the fear of sending her teenage son to Seoul alone, a city that might as well have been another planet compared to Gyeochang, she let him go. She signed the papers. She trusted Big Hit Entertainment, this small company she had never heard of, because the people there promised her that they would take care of her son. They promised training, education, support, and a fair partnership. She wasn't naive, she was hopeful. And hope, when it's placed in the hands of people who don't deserve it, becomes the most dangerous thing in the world. Fast forward to 2023. Taehyung releases Layover, his debut solo album. And Layover is different. It's not a pop album in any conventional sense. It's a jazz-inflected, R&B tinged, mood-driven collection of songs that sounds like late-night conversations and early morning confessions. It's intimate in a way that K-pop rarely allows itself to be. Taehyung didn't want to conquer the charts with Layover, he wanted to touch people. He wanted to create something that felt like him, not like a product designed by committee. And in that ambition, he was profoundly successful. Layover debuted at number 2 on the Billboard 200. Slow Dancing became a global hit. Critics praised its artistic maturity. Fans were mesmerized by a side of Taehyung they had always sensed, but never fully heard, the introspective, melancholic, deeply romantic artist beneath the charismatic idol exterior. But behind the beautiful music, a crisis was unfolding that would eventually blow the doors off the entire HYBE contract scandal. And it started with something that seemed small but was actually seismic, Taehyung's acting career. See, what most international fans don't fully appreciate is that Kim Taehyung has always had a parallel ambition beyond music, acting. He appeared in the Korean historical drama Hwarang in 2016-2017 and demonstrated genuine talent. Not idol playing at acting talent, but real, compelling, camera loves this person talent. Since then, he had expressed consistent interest in pursuing more acting opportunities. Scripts were sent to him. Offers came in, serious offers from respected Korean directors and production companies. This wasn't a vanity project. This was a legitimate second career path for an artist whose screen presence was undeniable. The cooperation contract addressed this explicitly. It contained provisions for members to pursue activities outside of music, including acting, with HYBE's support and facilitation. The company was supposed to help manage these opportunities, reviewing scripts, negotiating deals, coordinating schedules. It was a collaborative process, and the contract made clear that HYBE's role was to facilitate, not to obstruct. But obstruct is exactly what happened. According to multiple reports from Korean entertainment industry sources, acting opportunities that were presented to Taehyung were systematically delayed, deprioritized, or allowed to expire without response by HYBE's management team. Scripts that were sent to HYBE for Taehyung's consideration sat in inboxes for weeks, sometimes months, without being forwarded to him. When production companies followed up, they received vague responses about scheduling conflicts or strategic timing considerations. Some of these opportunities eventually went to other actors who, with all due respect, did not possess Kim Taehyung's combination of global fame, natural talent, and fan-driven guaranteed viewership. These weren't just missed opportunities. They were contractual violations. The agreement said facilitation. The reality was obstruction. And the pattern suggested something more troubling than mere incompetence. It suggested that HYBE had made a strategic decision that Taehyung's acting career was not a priority, not because it wouldn't be successful, but because its success wouldn't directly benefit HYBE's music-focused revenue model in the way that album releases and concert tours would. They wanted him in the studio, not on set. They wanted him generating music revenue, not acting revenue. This isn't just a BTS story. This is an industry story. For decades, the K-pop system has operated on a fundamental imbalance. Young artists sign contracts when they have no leverage, give the best years of their lives to companies that profit enormously from their talent, and are expected to trust that the system will treat them fairly. Most of the time, that trust is rewarded with something that looks like fairness from the outside, but, when examined closely, reveals 1,000 small inequities that compound over time into something that can only be called exploitation. What makes the BTS case extraordinary isn't that it happened, it's that it was exposed. These 7 men, and the families who love them, had enough visibility, enough resources, and enough courage to challenge a system that is designed to discourage challenges. And it was a mother, not a lawyer, not an executive, not a politician, who finally said the words that needed to be said. To every artist out there who has ever felt that something wasn't right but was too afraid to speak, your instincts are valid. Read your contracts. Ask questions. Demand transparency. And never, ever let anyone tell you that loyalty means silence. To every parent who has ever sent their child into the entertainment industry with hope and a prayer, watch, listen, count. And when the numbers don't add up, when the promises don't match the reality, speak. Your voice matters. Taehyung's mother proved that. And that's our countdown. 7 boys from different corners of South Korea who came together and changed the world. One corporation that forgot the promises it made. And one mother's voice that reminded everyone, the industry, the public, the world, that contracts aren't just paper. They're promises. And broken promises have consequences. Thank you for watching. Thank you for staying until the end. If this story moved you, share it not for clicks, not for algorithms, but because the truth deserves to travel. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and never stop asking questions.